As a lot of you guys know, I've been spending a ton of time playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links these past couple weeks, mainly because we don't have an updated TCG ban list, which makes the format pretty stale. But one of the things that was suggested that I talk about on my streams in a video was talking about outdated TCG cards that would potentially break Duel Links format, and I think it's really interesting. I think that I've kind of mentioned this before, but I think I'm in a unique position where I've played both games pretty extensively now, and I think I have a good grasp on the format in both games, so I thought it'd be cool to talk about. And I do want to make two sort of caveats for this list. First off, these cards do have to be outdated, and I know it's in the title, I know I just said it, but it is really important to note that I'm only talking about cards that no one is playing in the TCG anymore. Now, many of these cards have been played in the past. That means they're not bad cards, but they certainly are outdated cards, and that's worth mentioning because obviously cards like Twin Twisters and Evenly Match would be insane in Duel Links. So I don't need to tell you that in a video. So we're going to be focusing on cards that no one's playing in the TCG and kind of talk about why they would be really good in Duel Links. And then the second caveat that I kind of, I don't know, I debated on this, and maybe I'll do a follow-up video. I'm not talking about archetype cards, and the reason I'm not doing that, and maybe this video is a little later than I would have liked to do it if I would have been playing Duel Links like a year ago. This probably would have been a little bit more well-positioned. But Duel Links right now really is based on a lot of archetypes, maybe even as much as the TCG, which is pretty surprising from what a lot of people thought Duel Links was going to be, and also what Duel Links used to be when it first came out, and archetypes weren't as a big a deal. But right now, pretty much every single matchup you face is going to be with some archetype cards, and I do acknowledge that. I understand that I could maybe make a video that's like the five outdated TCG archetypes that are really good in Duel Links, or that could break Duel Links. But in this video, I want to focus on singular cards, and they're all kind of different in their own way, and I think even if these cards themselves wouldn't break Duel Links, at least the mechanics behind them very well could. Anyway, let's jump right in. If there's one thing that Duel Links is missing, it's spot removal, and if there's another thing that Duel Links is missing, it's extra special summons without requiring any real setup. And because of this, I think the fifth card on this list that could really break Duel Links, or cards like this, would be Chaos Sorcerer. Obviously, a card like Blackluster Soldier would be insane in Duel Links, but I even just think that adding Chaos Sorcerer might be too powerful. Certainly you would have to splash it into something else. You wouldn't just make a deck around Chaos Sorcerer, but I think because Grass is at 3 in Duel Links, whereas it's banned in the TCG, I think a card like Chaos Sorcerer actually could be extremely powerful in a Duel Links format. There simply aren't a lot of pieces of spot removal, and there aren't a lot of ways to just special summon monsters from your hand without any like specific cards doing it. So I think Chaos Sorcerer could be a pretty big deal. Now, there is sort of the drawback that it does require some graveyard setup, but I think it would fit right at home in many of the grass decks that Duel Links has right now, or could have in the future. Maybe there's some crazy dark and light sort of chaos strategy that you would make in Duel Links if Chaos Sorcerer was out there, because right now, even though there are a couple chaos monsters in Duel Links, there isn't really a ton of incentive to actually play a chaos deck, especially with grass. However, if they gave us cards like Chaos Sorcerer, maybe some other good light and dark monsters that are really good standalone cards, maybe even a card like Cyber Dragon, which I don't think would break Duel Links, but in this deck would be very good. If they gave us sort of generic chaos cards, I see Chaos Sorcerer being a very, very powerful card if it was eventually added to Duel Links. Next up, at number 4, we have Marshmallon. Now, this card is obviously really outdated and hasn't seen play in a very long time in the TCG, but it does two things that make it very unique in a Duel Links metagame. The first thing that it does is that it can't be destroyed by battle, and that's actually huge. Definitely the top decks do have spot removal, maybe not as much spot removal as you would expect from like a TCG strategy, which is why Marshmallon isn't as good in the TCG, but in Duel Links there are a variety of decks that simply don't have outs to cards like Marshmallon if you have so many of them. If you have 3 copies of Marshmallon in your deck, you might actually just stall your opponent out, but more importantly, Marshmallon does 1,000 damage when it's flipped. So not only is it a super annoying card to actually deal with, especially in like a couple turns, maybe after like 3 or 4 turns you can draw your out to it, and obviously decks like Amazonas and Spellbooks have outs to it, but in general, cards that can't be destroyed by battle are really good in Duel Links, and I think that Marshmallon, not only with that protection effect, but also with that 1,000 damage, could actually see a ton of play in burn decks. We saw cards like Massive Morph get limited because Duel Links actually has had issues with burn decks in the past. Actually, pretty much all of the limited cards on the Forbidden in limited lists are from burn decks for the most part, which is pretty crazy to think about. But yeah, I think Marshmallon and just more cards that can't be destroyed by battle, and especially cards that can't be destroyed by card effects, would probably break Duel Links. But I think Marshmallon would be a good introductory card if they wanted to add cards like this. And I almost put Spirit Reaper in this spot, but I think that Spirit Reaper actually wouldn't be as good just because cards like Wall of Disruption are so popular, which puts it to 0 attack, and then so if they switch it to attack, you can just attack it a bunch of times and kill them. But more importantly, Enemy Controller is one of the most popular quick play spells in the entire game, and that obviously just instantly kills Spirit Reaper. So I think a card like Marshmallon actually could see some experimentation if it was added to Duel Links. However, it would probably only see play in degenerate burn strategies, so probably shouldn't be added to the game. At number 3, we have a more consistent version of an already degenerate card, and that is OJAMA Trio. Now, if you haven't been familiar with Duel Links, one of the decks that was really popular a while ago was a Cyberstein into OJAMA King sort of lockout strategy, because Duel Links only has 3 monster zones, but I think that that requires way too much setup for the current Duel Links metagame, which is why you don't see it as often. But more importantly, I think that a card like OJAMA Trio actually could just completely shut pretty much any deck down. I mean, the important thing about OJAMA Trio in Duel Links versus the TCG is that if you use that card in the TCG, yeah, your opponent can't exceed summon with it, but nowadays they can just use it for a link summon, which makes it a lot worse. However, in Duel Links, not only are there not many extra deck monsters that you can actually use, there's only fusions at the moment, and while we are getting synchros in a couple weeks here, I suppose at the end of September, OJAMA Trio would just completely lock your opponent out of the game because it puts OJAMA tokens in all 3 of your opponent's monster zones, and they can't even be tributed, which is like the main way that you would get rid of these cards if they were played. I mentioned earlier that Massive Morph was hit on the Duel Links ban list, and cards like that that just prevent your opponent from attacking are really, really powerful, and you can kind of see that activating 3 copies of Massive Morph is kind of just like activating 1 copy of OJAMA Trio. They're both doing the basic same thing here, where you're just locking your opponent out, but in the case of OJAMA Trio, pretty much anytime you flip this card, and there obviously aren't a lot of counters to it, I don't even know, I don't think wiretaps in this game, maybe 7 Tools of the Bandit is, but in general, anytime that you would flip OJAMA Trio, you would just instantly win and be able to deck out your opponent, which obviously is way too broken. Could Duel Links develop to the point where OJAMA Trio isn't broken? Maybe. I think though that would require actually editing the field to have more than 3 zones, which I don't think they're going to do. So as long as Duel Links only has 3 monster card zones, OJAMA Trio is definitely way too broken to be added to the game. At the number 2 spot, we have a card that I've obviously spent many hours making fun of, and that is Magic Cylinder. Now, Magic Cylinder isn't very good in the TCG. It doesn't do enough damage, it's a minus in card economy. However, it makes a big difference when you have 8,000 life points versus 4,000 life points, which means that pretty much anytime you activate Magic Cylinder in Duel Links, if it was added to the game, you'd be taking out at least half of your opponent's life points, which is pretty insane to think about, especially if there were multiple copies allowed, which would mean that anytime you attacked without having a card like Galaxy Cyclone or Cosmic Cyclone to actually take out your opponent's back row, you're at risk of just losing the game instantly. So even though Magic Cylinder isn't very good in the TCG because of the lower life point count in Duel Links, a card like Magic Cylinder would be extremely toxic and probably a staple 3 of. And I think that goes to show that I really do think Yu-Gi-Oh! Is meant to be played at 8,000 life points. I mean, just in general, there are so many strategies that are really good in Duel Links, specifically because there are only 4,000 life points. There's a lot more OTKing in Duel Links than in the TCG, which is pretty funny to think about and may be surprising to both TCG players and Duel Links players to hear about. But as someone that's played both games a lot now, I definitely think that Duel Links, and I really, really mean this, is you're more likely to get OTK'd in Duel Links than you are in the TCG, because in Duel Links, if you don't have a defensive play on your very first turn, the chance of your opponent OTKing you on their second turn is actually just astronomical, unlike the TCG, where there's a lot more defensive cards that are actually good and can blow up your opponent's cards. That doesn't really happen in Duel Links. So a card like Magic Cylinder, very, very powerful. It does way too much damage, so I really, really doubt, even though Magic Cylinder is a classic card, I really doubt that they'll actually add it to the game. However, in the case of Magic Cylinder, I wouldn't be surprised if maybe down the road they make it a character skill that you can use like once per duel that's telegraph to your opponent. Maybe that wouldn't be too overpowered, but I think as a physical card, it'd be way too broken. At the number 1 spot, we have one of the craziest possible additions to Duel Links, a card that if it gets added would probably break the game forever, and that is Gorz, the Emissary of Darkness. Now this card saw a ton of play in the TCG, maybe even more so than any card on this list prior to it, but Gorz, the Emissary of Darkness, is currently at 3 in the TCG and no one plays it. It is the definition of an outdated card. However, in Duel Links, it would be insane. Not only is it an excellent piece of defensive card that your opponent can't actually telegraph because it's just in your hand, not only does it do that, but it also really threatens an OTK every single time that you activate it, because you can simply crash whatever the token is into the opponent's monster, and now you're left with a 2700 attack monster. So anytime that you can Gorz while having another monster in your hand that has more than 1300 attack points, you threaten lethal damage on your opponent. And I think that Gorz is one of the silliest monsters in Duel Links if it was to be added, maybe even more so than Magic Cylinder, because it's basically a Magic Cylinder that comes with an extra 2700 damage. Obviously it requires a little more setup, and obviously your opponent technically could kill you before you get a chance to activate Gorz, but I think in most cases Duel Links would just be completely broken if they added Gorz. You'd pretty much have to play cards like Divine Wrath and Ultimate Providence just to have a chance against it. Now maybe it is a good sort of counterpoint that Gorz is kind of weak to Wall Disruption, but I think in general that wouldn't be able to actually balance the card. I think it'd just be way too powerful because it summons 2 monsters, 2 huge monsters that your opponent really can't deal with. Anyway though, that's going to wrap up today's video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this discussion. If you would like to see that archetype video, the 5 outdated archetypes that would be broken in Duel Links, please let me know. I'm certainly interested in doing it, but I'd like to hear your guys' feedback on this video and see if it's actually something that you want to hear about. Anyway though, I'll see you guys later. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.